Last year, my friend was given a terminal cancer diagnosis, and I prayed for him tearfully that he would be saved, that he would live, that he would be healed. And I prayed faithfully. I prayed every day. He prayed as well. He prayed, his wife prayed, lots of people were praying and believing that God is able to answer prayer. They're praying for him to be healed, and then earlier this year, he died, and we mourned him at his funeral. There's people with similar stories. Maybe you have a similar story where you ask God, or you know someone who's asking God for something, for freedom from some sickness or abuse. You're asking God to intervene, and you don't see it happen. And God doesn't give you what you ask for. It raises a question. What's the point? Why are we praying? Why isn't God answering these prayers? I want to try and give you a good answer to this question, because there's some bad answers, but I think there are some good answers as well. Now, one of the bad answers is to just blame people. The reason that your prayer wasn't answered is your fault. You didn't believe enough. This is based on something true in the Bible, but it's twisted. Okay, Jesus does say that the guarantee that prayer will be answered is for those who believe. He says, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you've received it and it will be yours. And he says that the one who doesn't doubt but believes, that's the one who's going to have answered prayer. But here's the truth behind that, right? You do need faith to pray, because prayer is not like wishing on an enslaved genie that has to do whatever you say, whether or not you think this genie has the power. Like Aladdin could not believe and then make a wish and it would happen, right? Prayer is also not like casting a spell like Harry Potter, saying the right words with the right swish and flick. I don't think it matters if Harry Potter believes in the power of the words and the swish and flick. He just needs to do it right, and then it will happen. That's not how prayer works. Prayer works because of having a relationship with a heavenly Father. Jesus, when he teaches us to pray, he says for us to say, "Our Father who is in heaven." Now, being able to call God our Father requires faith. You can't just approach God in heaven with your prayer. You need to be reconciled to him. Because of sin, because of our rebellion against God, we're his enemies. But Jesus reconciles us to God. Through his death on the cross, he bears our sin in his body so that we can be cleansed from sin. We can be called righteous. James says the prayer of a righteous man is powerful and effective. Okay, you need to be reconciled to God. You can't just be, throwing a wish out to an unknown God, a God that you're not sure if he's there, a God that you don't really know who he is. You're just trying something out and seeing what happens. That's like wishing. That's not praying. That's not knowing your Father and approaching him with prayer. Okay, prayer also works because Jesus has ascended to heaven as our mediator. He's at the right hand of the throne, and he sympathizes with us. He's our high priest and our representative. So we can approach him for help in time of need. So for prayer to work, you need to have Jesus as your high priest. You need to have God as your Father. And you have those things through faith. Okay, this is not just a blanket thing for everybody in the world. You can just pray and it'll happen. This is a gift for Christians. It's part of the gospel. You are reconciled to God. You're made his children. When Jesus talks about prayer and why it works, he says, if you who are evil give, bread and fish and stuff to your kids when they're hungry, how much more will your Father in heaven give good things to those who ask him? So you need to believe in Jesus for prayer to work. That's what Jesus is talking about when he says this stuff. The thing is, though, that people will take that, take these promises about how you need to believe and then dismiss Christians' prayers, people who really do believe, who know God as their Father and are asking God sincerely and persistently to do something, and it doesn't happen. And people will say, oh, well, yeah, you didn't believe enough. And something that they're going to reach for is when Jesus, in Matthew, I think it's 17, his disciples were not able to cast out a demon. And they asked Jesus why, and he says, because of your little faith. And people say, well, there you go. They have little faith, they need bigger faith. But that's, that's just taking this one word out of context. Look at what he says next. Okay, if you want to go to, I think it's Matthew 17. Hopefully it is. You can read along while I paraphrase it. He says, then after he criticizes their little faith, he says, if you had faith the size of a mustard seed, you could say to a mountain, be uprooted and thrown into the sea, and it would happen. So what he's saying there is, you only need a tiny bit of faith. The mustard seed is proverbially small. It's like the smallest seed. You need the smallest amount of faith. And then, the prayer will be answered. It will work. He's not saying the problem is you didn't have enough faith. You need to just have a tiny bit of faith. You see, it's not that it's not that your little bit of faith isn't enough. You need more, right? Your little bit of faith is enough. So what does it mean when he says, because of your little faith? Is he contradicting himself? No, he's not. Look a few verses earlier, when Jesus first hears about this demon that's not cast out, and he complains, he's disappointed, and he says, how long do I have to put up with this unbelieving generation? When we determine the meaning of a word, then it's not a good idea to just take the two compound parts of the word and then say that's what it means. It's good to look at the context. Okay, so what's the Greek word that's translated little faith? It's oligopistia, something like that. It's a compound word, oligos and pistia. It's paralleling apistia, okay? Pistia means faith, a is a negation of that. So he complains about the unbelieving generation, apistia. This generation hasn't got faith. And that's the problem. That, like I said, prayer works because of faith, because of reconciliation with God, because you believe that he's good and that he's able to answer your prayer, because you have been cleansed from sin and you can now approach God as his child to make a request. But that's not the problem is that there's not faith. Okay? Oligos is something I think that confuses people when they read little faith is probably they think that it says faith and then there's like an adjective that means little. But this is just one word, oligos pistia, and oligos doesn't really mean little. It means scarcely or barely. In 2 Peter 2 verse 18, we're told about false teachers who lure people away, appealing to the evil desires that they're scarcely escaping. So are these people actually escaping their sinful desires? No, they're not. They, maybe appear to be for a time, but then when the false teachers lead them out of the church with lies that allow them to indulge their sinful desires, you see, they haven't escaped their sinful desires. They're still enslaved to them, which is why the false teachers were able to capture them by pulling on those desires that they haven't actually escaped. So, determining the meaning of a word by just looking at its compounds, like barely faith or scarcely faith, is not the best way to determine the meaning of a word. When we do that in this case, and also look at the context where oligos pistia is paralleled by apistia, what we're talking about here is not that the disciples believed that they would be able to cast out the demon, but that the disciples had some sort of nominal faith, technically prayer works and stuff, but this demon is too strong for us. That's what they really believe. This first answer, I think it's a fair answer for somebody who is not a Christian and they're just wishing on an unknown God, and they say, why isn't my prayer answered? Well, you're not praying with faith. Believe in Jesus, okay? Believe in Jesus, and then these promises will apply to you. When people take these verses out of context to try and say to a Christian, look, the reason your prayer wasn't answered is because you didn't believe, I think it's lazy, and you just blaming somebody where you don't even, you can't see their heart. Really what's happening is your theology is being challenged by their experience, and so you are just making up a story about what their experience really was, even though they're saying, no, I did believe. Well, what are some other reasons that a prayer might not be answered? Okay, well, let's talk a bit more about faith. So praying with faith is not just believing that God is able to answer prayer, but it's also trusting God's will, believing that his will is good and not bad, right? It's believing that his will is better than your will. It's not thinking I have a better idea than God. It's not making demands of God, right? That's like wishing, isn't it? That's wishing on a genie, making a demand of the genie, and it has to do what you say. Faithful prayer is saying, like Jesus says, not my will, but yours be done. Jesus teaches us to pray to God, your kingdom come, your will be done. We're not supposed to be praying for our will to be done, but for God's will to be done. So one of the reasons that some prayers are unanswered is because what we're praying for is not good. Okay, so if you read these promises about, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you've received it and it'll be yours, and then you say, great, I'll have a mansion and I'll have a sports car. You're not asking for God's will to be done. You're just asking for your will to be done, right? And this is an obvious example where people are just being selfish. And God, when he says no to those prayers, he's sparing us of slavery to wealth and making an idol out of these things. But there's also, there's a lot of people who maybe will say, well, I'm not praying for something selfish. I'm praying for something noble and good. There's people who are being abused. Maybe you're being abused, and you're praying that God would deliver you. That's not a selfish prayer, is it? It's a noble prayer. You're maybe praying for someone to be healed, praying for someone with a cancer diagnosis, and you want them to live. If I'm saying a faithful prayer is trusting that God's will is better than yours, then how can I say that about my friend? How can I say it's better that he die of cancer than that he live? How could I say that about someone who is being abused, someone who's trapped and they're asking to be set free? How could I say it's better for them to suffer than for them to be freed? Yeah, it seems crazy, doesn't it? But Jesus, when the night that he was betrayed, the day before he was crucified, he was in the Garden of Gethsemane and he prayed that this cup would pass from him. He didn't want to be crucified. He asked that he would be spared from that torture, from the pain of being betrayed, of having one of his friends betray him and then being tortured by the Romans and killed on a cross. That is, horrific abuse. It's a terrible suffering, a gruesome death. And Jesus didn't want to experience it. He asked that it would pass from him. Now, this is something that we can relate to, isn't it? This is what I was asking for, that a cup of suffering would not have to be drunk by my friend. This is what people are praying for when they're asking to be delivered from something evil that's been done to them. Don't make me drink this cup. But Jesus said, not my will, but yours be done. Even in that situation, Jesus believed that his horrible death, if it's God's will, it's better than a comfortable life, or even, an uncomfortable life. He believed that that horrible event actually could be better than something, good and pleasant. That's because Jesus teaches us, he believes that God is able to use all things for the good of those who love him, as St. Paul says in his letter to the Romans. God's able to use all things for the good of those who love him, even suffering. Paul talks about how if we suffer with Christ, we'll be glorified with Christ. Suffering is something God can use for good. Like Joseph is betrayed by his brothers. His brothers abuse him. They want to kill him. They put him in a pit. Then they decide they'll sell him into slavery. Joseph is then lied about. He's put into prison. There's horrible things that are done, the evil acts done against him. But then later in his life, when he's reconciled with his brothers, he says to them, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. What a incredible faith. That prayer that Jesus prayed, that thing that Joseph said to his brothers, that is, really shaped by faith, isn't it? That's a faithful prayer. A prayer that says, God, here is my request, this is what I want, but I trust you are going to do what is right. That's praying with faith. That prayer is answered, isn't it? Jesus' request to be spared the cup is denied, but his prayer that God's will be done is answered. So when we pray like that, our prayers are being answered. But I want to say a bit more about, the specific requests, like my friend that he would live, or someone who wants to be set free from a horrible situation of abuse or something like that. Is God going to answer those prayers? And I want to say something about Acts chapter 12. Herod is oppressing the church. He takes James prisoner and he kills him. And then he takes Peter prisoner. Now the church prays for Peter to be set free, and then an angel rescues Peter. It's a miracle. Peter is set free, the prayers are answered. But this Bible chapter about answered prayer has got James dying at the start of it. Why did James die? Why was Peter set free and James died? Why are some of our prayers answered and some of them, we don't get what we ask? Was nobody praying for James? Maybe somebody would say, well, they prayed for Peter, they didn't pray for James. But it seems unlikely. James is taken prisoner. Does his own brother, John, just not care? It's just not bothered that James has been taken prisoner? Is it more likely that somebody prayed for him to be set free, or that just nobody cared? I think probably people did pray for James. But James died, Peter was rescued. The thing is, though, that I think both James and Peter are going to be free from Herod forever. They're both going to live forever. When Jesus returns, the dead will be raised, and James will have died when Herod killed him. Peter, who was rescued, also died when he was killed by Nero. So that answered prayer, it only delayed Peter's death, and it didn't actually end the oppression that Peter experienced. He continued to suffer throughout his life until he was martyred, just like James was. But ultimately, both of them are going to be free. Herod's tyranny is over, and it won't last forever. Peter and James will both live forever, worshipping God and glorifying him. Their bodies will be restored. All the evil that Herod and Nero did to them will not last. It will be undone. In Revelation chapter 8, there's a scene where the Lamb, Jesus the Lamb, has undone the seventh seal, the final seal on the scroll. When it's unsealed, then God is going to rescue the world from evil and suffering. So the seventh seal is taken off, and then there's silence in heaven. And then the prayers of the saints are offered to God. The prayers of the saints are offered, and then there's thunder and lightning, and the return of Jesus begins. God's judgment on earth begins. God is going to remove all of evil and suffering and death. Satan is going to be thrown into the lake of fire, along with death and along with everyone who follows Satan, everyone who rejects Jesus, all of the oppressors of the earth. Okay, and this is not just the supervillains of the 20th century. It's us as well. This is humanity. We are oppressors of the earth. We oppress each other. We hurt each other. You might think you're a good person, but you have hurt people and you have hurt the world that you live in. For us to live in a paradise forever, to live in a perfect world without death or pain or suffering, we need to be transformed, okay? And if we're not transformed through Jesus' death on the cross, there is nothing that will do it. And if we're not transformed through Jesus' death on the cross, we follow Satan, the arch oppressor of the earth, into the lake of fire. And that judgment against the oppressors of the earth is the liberation of creation. Okay, you can't set free slaves without confronting the slave owners. Israel were not rescued from Egypt without Pharaoh being confronted and defeated. And the earth will not be rescued without confronting the powers of evil, which include humanity. We became part of the powers of evil through sin, which is why we need Jesus to rescue us and transform us. Now, those prayers are going to be answered, right? The prayers of the saints are offered, and then God answers with judgment. Those prayers that are being stored up, those are, my prayers for my friend. Those are your prayers for your friends. All the times that you have prayed that God would heal the sick, that he would save someone from death, that he would save someone from a horrible situation, that he would, intervene in global politics, that he would help those people who are being murdered by their own governments. All those prayers that you pray and then you don't see what's happening. You don't see what's happening. They're being stored up and they'll be offered to God and he will answer. And all the tyrants, sickness and death, everything that we are praying against will be answered. So on that day, those prayers that I believe were given for James will be answered on that day. My prayers for my friend will be answered on that day. Cancer will be destroyed and his body will be alive. And your prayers will be answered on that day as well if you pray with the faith that Jesus talks about that reconciles you to God. Peter's freedom from prison, I think it's a glimpse of God's power to save that is ultimately going to be seen when Jesus returns in the future. But that power, it can break into our present. We can glimpse it now. We can experience it now. And that's why we pray and we do make requests to God and say, please save my friend's life. End this evil situation. Because God can and does foreshadow the ultimate victory that he will have. He gives us a glimpse of it now, tastes of it, to build our faith, to demonstrate the truth of his reign as king. But the thing is, if every single request that we gave God, all of my prayers, all of your prayers, all of the prayers around the world for freedom from sickness and death and tyranny, oppression, abuse, if God answered every single one of those prayers, that would be Judgment Day. Okay, that would be the end of all of evil and suffering and pain. Now, that's something that we long for, but also God is patient with us. He is waiting for that day. And I'm glad that he's waiting for that day, because there's people I love who don't believe in Jesus. I think the Bible teaches us that because they don't believe in Jesus, they are still part of the powers of the world, the evil powers that God is going to confront and judge, convict of sin, and throw into the lake of fire. And I don't want that to happen to people that I love. So I pray for them that they will believe, that they'll be saved. And I want God to answer those prayers. So at the same time, I want God to heal my friend from sickness, to intervene in countries with evil governments. I want him to make a difference in the world I live in. And I want him to be patient and to delay that day so that there will be time for more people to believe in Jesus. And specific people that I love, but just generally as well. We should not want people to miss out on that opportunity. We should want everybody that God has appointed to believe, and not jump ahead, right? We should want God to answer our prayers in the proper time. That involves patience, that God endures evil and suffering for a time. So let me just try and close with a summary of what I think. Why does God not answer prayer? Well, sometimes it's because we're not really praying to our Father in heaven. We're just making a wish on an unknown God. That's not prayer, okay? And God hasn't promised to answer every wish that's made for him, made to him. Sometimes we are praying to the God that we know that we've been reconciled to, but we're praying for something bad. Now, that's probably uncommon. I think most Christians are probably not asking God to, let me seduce this person, let me, defeat this person and fight. Things like that is probably uncommon. But of course, Jesus' promises don't apply to that, because that's not a prayer of faith. That's a selfish prayer where you're wishing. So sometimes God doesn't answer prayers because we're just wishing. Whether or not we're a Christian, we're just making a wish. We're not actually praying a prayer of faith that trusts that God, that the God that we know and love is good and that his will is good. But other times we are, and this is really the meat of the question. Sometimes we are offering a noble prayer, a good thing that of course is good. Of course, freedom from oppression is good. And yet it doesn't happen. And in that situation, what comforts me is the knowledge that my prayer is being stored up. And one day God is going to answer it. That when Jesus returns and makes all things new, one of the things that will precipitate that will be my prayers and your prayers being poured out before God. Prayers that were stored up, and God said, yes, I will do this. But first of all, we're going to together bear with evil and suffering so that more people will believe before the day that I answer this prayer. But your prayer is going to be part of God making all things new. I hope that is a comfort to you. I know this is a really painful question for a lot of people. If there's something that you struggle with emotionally, listening to me chat about it for the last however long it was, it's a big ask that's really going to touch your heart and help you process these things. But I pray that it will. I'm praying for you that you would find comfort in what the scripture tells us about prayer, and that you find comfort in the Christian hope for the future of God making all things new. Thank you very much for sticking with me. See you next time.